Have you ever wondered what it meant to fall in love or be promised in love when your world was not only bounded by walls, but suspicion? Join us to explore this dramatic and surprising story now. It's twilight in a narrow street. You can smell bread cooling behind shuttered wooden stalls, hear the clink of a distant bell, and feel the stone beneath your sandals still holding the day's heat. This is the Jewish quarter of a European town in the 14th century, and you've just passed beneath a carved arch bearing a small Star of David. The world feels different here, quieter, tense, but something stirs the air tonight. Not fear, but joy. A wedding is about to begin. Before you snuggle into your blanket, hit like on the video and comment where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's so fun to know who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the scent of crushed myrtle leaves and sweet wine. Lanterns flicker from windows above, casting golden eyes onto the street. Tonight, behind the old walls and cracked shutters, two families prepare to become one. But unlike the pageantry of Christian cathedrals and the toll of church bells, this marriage will take place under something simpler. A canopy held aloft by four trembling hands and surrounded by murmured prayers. You hear footsteps on cobblestones behind you. Koa, the young apprentice to the community's aging scribe, shuffles past with ink-stained sleeves and a bundle of papers, perhaps the ketubah, the marriage contract. He's always a bit nervous, always late, but his heart beats as fast as yours as he scurries to deliver history to the ceremony. Somewhere nearby, Lonnie, a young woman who dreams of teaching the children their letters, adjusts the edges of her shawl and smiles toward the sky. Imagine holding that canopy pole, the rabbi jokes softly to the boy gripping it at the corner. It's not heavy, just all of tradition. It's a gentle kind of pressure. Here, in a world that has been pushed to the edges of the dominant Christian order, a Jewish marriage is more than celebration. It is resistance. It's continuity. It's not only a bond between a man and a woman, but between a people and their covenant, a reminder that they still exist, still sing, still love, even if the king's edicts say otherwise. Historians still argue whether these marriages were acts of community preservation or quiet rebellion. But to the people within the walls, they were both. You notice the courtyard filling now, men in long robes and skullcaps, women whispering behind veils. A few chickens scatter as laughter bubbles from a cluster of girls trying to glimpse the bride. You don't see her yet. She's hidden away preparing. In the room where she waits, elder women brush her hair braid in thin red cords and hum ancient melodies. It's not just for beauty. There are blessings in every motion, every touch, every breath of preparation. Outside, someone sets a table with simple sweets, honeyed almonds, round loaves of challah wine in tarnished silver cups. Not grand by noble standards, but rich enough for memory. These weddings cost families dearly, not just in coins, but in risk. For every celebration, there's always the threat that someone beyond the ghetto might find reason to call it too loud, too proud, too Jewish. And yet they continue. Koa returns, panting. "It's ready," he whispers to the rabbi, holding up the contract still drying at the edges. The rabbi, old Tua, strokes his beard and smiles. His staff, curved and carved with symbols older than the town itself, leans nearby. "Then let us begin," he says, not too loudly, just enough to draw the eyes of the gathered. The groom stands at the edge of the courtyard. He looks no older than 20, his shoulders square, but trembling. He's fumbling with the ring, a simple gold band, plain, perfect. You wonder what he's thinking. About duty, desire, survival. The bride enters last, When she steps forward, veiled, she does not walk alone. Her mother and aunt flank her sides, hands trembling together. And though her veil obscures her features, you feel her presence as if the whole courtyard tilts to her gravity. She walks slowly as tradition demands, 7 circuits around her husband-to-be, a silent spell of protection. This too has meaning. Historians still debate whether the circling was mystical defense or symbolic surrender. But the truth rests not in parchment, but in the eyes of the watchers, old Tua's moist gaze, Lonnie's clenched hands, Koa's caught breath. The chupa, the canopy, shivers slightly in the night air. It's no more than a cloth held on 4 poles, but it contains everything: the sky, the stars, the weight of generations. You wonder, what does this marriage mean in a world like this? A world where Jews cannot own land beyond these streets, where a wrong look might cost you your home or worse. And yet, here now 2 people defy that world, not by running, not by shouting, but by joining hands and speaking ancient words. The rabbi begins the blessings. He speaks of joy, of creation, of Adam and Eve, and of the joy that will soon pour like wine. There are 7 blessings, the Shiva Brachot, and each falls on the ears of the crowd like a drop of oil, smooth, fragrant, holy. As the groom places the ring on her finger, you realize this is not just survival, it's hope. Quiet, burning hope. Then the sound, a crunch. A glass wrapped in cloth stepped on with a swift motion. Mazel tov, the courtyard roars laughter, shaking the stars. And just like that, in a world not made for them, 2 people carve out a corner of it and call it home. Matchmaking, you learn quickly, is not merely a matter of preference or romance in this world. It's strategy. It's survival. And tonight, as the echoes of the wedding blessing still drift above tiled rooftops, you're drawn to an earlier scene, just weeks before the ceremony, when the whole thing began, not with a glance or a letter, but with a visit. You sit at the edge of a modest kitchen, the scent of garlic and onions curling from a simmering pot. Across from you, 2 mothers speak in tones both hushed and fierce. A third woman, older and dressed in a dark woolen shawl, listens without blinking. She is Rivka the Shadchanit, the matchmaker, and she holds more power than either family would admit aloud. You observe the way she studies them, not just their words, but the silence between them. She's done this 100 times, perhaps more. She's weighed every potential groom like a merchant inspects figs' firmness, sweetness, hidden bruises. The young man from the wedding you now know was once just a name in her ledger, and the bride, well, her mother says she's modest, skilled with wool, knows her psalms. But Rivka's eyes look elsewhere, to the way the girl enters the room, head bowed, just enough hands folded, eyes flickering once to the stranger at the table. You imagine for a moment being evaluated not by your dreams, but by your suitability, your family's debts, your uncle's reputation, your neighbor's gossip. How heavy does that feel? Her cousin was fined for breaking curfew last spring, one mother murmurs. But the boy has good prospects. The other counters, his uncle trades with the Gentiles safely. Rivka Yika says little. She simply nods once and jots something in her little book. The decision, you realize, is nearly made. Not with a kiss, not with a promise, but with a calculation. Historians still argue whether matchmaking was a tool of communal protection or patriarchal control. Perhaps both. But one thing is clear in this Christian world, where every Jew must be twice as cautious. The Shadchanim are as vital as scribes or midwives. You return to the present with the taste of the wedding wine still on your lips, and you recall how the groom first learned of the match. He was summoned to the rabbi's study with little ceremony. There he stood, stiffly beside his father, nodding as names were spoken. "She is kind," his father said, "and steady. No nonsense in her, and no scandal." The boy said nothing, just nodded. Perhaps his thoughts wandered briefly to the daughter of the tinsmith, the one with the loud laugh. But thoughts are not vows. Later, he meets her for the first time in the presence of their families. It's not love at first sight, those are Christian stories. Here, the spark is subtler. A moment when their eyes meet, and neither looks away too quickly. A hint of curiosity. A shared silence that feels comfortable. And still, it's not final. A dowry must be agreed upon. Gold linens, a set of dishes. These aren't just gifts, they're security declarations of intent, symbolic armor against poverty and exile. You listen as negotiations unfold over 3 nights. One side offers a silver menorah, the other counters with 2 bolts of silk. Lonnie, standing near the door, stifles a giggle at the seriousness of it all. Koa, watching the parchment grow thick with ink, whispers, "I think she's worth 10 bolts at least." Quirky as it sounds, some communities even listed the value of a goose or a borrowed mule in their marital contracts. Every item had weight. Eventually, agreement comes. A date is chosen. And once that happens, the whole ghetto seems to breathe a little deeper. Not just for the couple's sake, but because every marriage is a tiny answer to the question no one dares speak aloud. Will we survive another generation? The next days are full of motion. The bride learns from her mother how to fold bed sheets, just so how to grind spices into paste, how to soften her voice when guests arrive. The groom learns how to check for mold in a roof beam, how to keep ledgers neat, how to stand straight, even when tax collectors sneer. But perhaps the most sacred preparations happen in the quiet moments. One evening, you find the groom alone, sitting beside a candle. He's rehearsing the blessing he'll say beneath the chuppah, stumbling over a single phrase, repeating it again and again. When you ask why that part matters, he says softly, "Because it's the part where I name her as my own, and ask the heavens to agree." You nod, you understand. Back at the bride's home, you glimpse her writing her name for the 100th time, trying different signatures. Not for vanity, but because after the wedding, she may need to sign for flour or speak in her husband's name to a magistrate. Her identity must hold weight even when he's not home. And just outside Tua, the rabbi walks slowly, murmuring to himself, perhaps crafting the blessing he'll say aloud. His staff taps against the stones rhythmically, a heartbeat of tradition. Historians still debate how much agency these young people truly had. But as you watch them prepare, not with giddy romance, but with trembling reverence, you sense that the answer doesn't lie in freedom, but in devotion. They choose this path not in protest, but in purpose. As the wedding day approaches, the mothers sew, the fathers polish their shoes, and even the chickens seem to know something's coming. Koa keeps dropping ink on his cuffs. Lonnie watches the stars more than usual. And you, dear traveler, you carry their story forward. You walk between their past and your present. You blink, and the courtyard reappears. The wine has been poured, the blessing spoken. But now you understand what it took to get here. You're awake before dawn, the sky still a hush of velvet gray, and already water is boiling over. Fire. Linens are folded with trembling hands, and someone is whispering blessings over a basin. Today is the day of the ketubah. The wedding isn't complete without it. That document, signed with care and sometimes hidden like a treasure, is the spine of the marriage, not just poetry or promise, but a binding contract. You run your fingers along the parchment and feel the grooves where ink has carved truth into the future. And here it lies now, on a wooden table in the rabbi's study, beneath the drowsy stare of an oil lamp and the vigilant gaze of Tua himself. His beard is still damp from morning ablutions. He squints down at the page through lenses thick as bottle glass. The ketubah is more than a document, it's insurance. It declares not only what the groom owes the bride should he abandon her, should tragedy strike, but also her rights, her dignity, and in its way, her shield against a world that often forgets Jewish women even exist outside market gossip. Imagine writing your vows, Tua muses aloud, and knowing they must stand up in court, God's court, and the dukes alike. The words are in Aramaic, ancient and thick as honey, even in this 14th century world that has learned to bend its tongue to Latin and French edicts. It lists names, amounts, promises, obligations, gold coins, a place to live, respect, bread. You remember the groom from earlier, the way his hands shook beneath the chuppah. Now you watch him write his name beneath the text with care as if afraid it might vanish. Koa hands him the ink, biting his lip to keep quiet. One drop, one smudge could mar it all. Don't forget, Lonnie whispers, as she leans in. The ketubah must be beautiful and impossible to argue with. Historians still debate whether the document empowered women or simply trapped them with a different leash. But here in this moment, you see a bride step into the room, head held higher than yesterday. She reads the text aloud with her uncle beside her, tracing every line. She doesn't blink. Add the date in Hebrew, and Christian reckoning, her uncle murmurs. So both courts will fear to touch it. That's the thing. Jewish marriages in this Christian world are not invisible. They're tolerated at best, despised at worst. And in towns where pogroms bloom from whispers and bad harvests, a properly written ketubah can be the difference between justice and silence. Some say a torn ketubah ends a marriage, Lonnie murmurs to you as you both walk the bride back to her chamber. But I think it just begins another kind of silence. Inside, the bride's mother places the folded parchment inside a small cedar box. Lavender is tucked alongside it, fragrance to mask mildew or perhaps fear. Later that day, you visit a neighbor whose marriage was 10 years ago. She keeps her ketubah sewn into the lining of her prayer shawl. Because if they come again, she whispers, I'll have it with me when I run. You pause. Imagine being that bride. Imagine needing your wedding contract to survive a road you never chose. Still, there is a strange kind of beauty in the inked flourishes, the intricate patterns drawn by scribes to frame the words. Some families commission elaborate art vines, doves, towers, golden thread along the border. If a wedding is joy, then the ketubah is proof it happened. A legal love song. Look here, Tua says, as he shows Koa an older scroll from a dusty shelf. This ketubah is from the Rhineland. See the dragon in the corner. That family survived 4 expulsions, and still they kept the contract. You think about what a dragon might symbolize. Not fear, but fierceness. A vow made beneath threat, but never broken. That evening, as the sun sets over tiled roofs and chimneys belch smoke into the cooling sky, you return to the couple's home. The ketubah is hung briefly on the wall above the table, beside the candle that will be lit for the first Shabbat as husband and wife. For one night, it will glow. A few neighbors stop by to admire it. Good penmanship, one says. A fair sum, says another. The father of the bride pours them wine, and you see him glance once more at the box, checking its safety. Even Koa, usually distracted by clouds or parchment scraps, falls silent beside it. It's like a map, he says. A map for a future we hope will still exist tomorrow. Historians still argue whether Jewish families of the 1300s expected their children to stay in one place for long. But a ketubah was always written for permanence, even in exile. A house might be burned, but a promise, if preserved, could rebuild it. That night, Lonnie sits with the bride and paints henna patterns on her hands. "You'll show them to your children," she says with a wink, "and tell them the story of how your ketubah made you a queen." Outside, the Christian city rests uneasy. The church bells mark the hour. A patrol passes near the ghetto gate, but inside a paper shield hangs strong. A single document, fragile yet powerful. And in your heart, you begin to understand. Here, love must be documented. Like law, protected. Like scripture, carried like fire through a storm. The sky bruises purple as dusk settles again over the rooftops, and a hush falls across the Jewish quarter. You're back in the courtyard, the wedding now in full bloom, and laughter crackles like candlelight. But there's something different about this celebration. Something restrained, as though joy must wear shoes too small or speak with its hand over its mouth. Because while this marriage dances to the rhythm of ancient blessings and proud heritage beyond the ghetto wall, Christian eyes are watching. Tonight's wedding has drawn attention not for its splendor, but for the fact that it's happening at all. From the upper windows of nearby Christian homes, silhouettes lean forward, half curious, half disapproving. You feel it even as you sip sweet wine and listen to a cousin of the bride sing a love poem in Hebrew. You turn and catch Lonnie's glance. Her lips are tight, her eyes fixed on the shadowed shapes outside. She knows what you know. One misplaced word, one too loud cheer. And this could be remembered not as a wedding, but as a provocation. Imagine celebrating your joy like a secret. How does it taste? Historians still argue whether Jews in medieval towns were permitted to celebrate weddings openly or only behind closed doors. Laws varied from town to town, year to year, depending on which bishop or duke had recently issued a decree. Some allowed music, but not dancing. Some forbade guests from walking through Christian streets in fine clothes. Others banned celebration altogether during Christian festivals, as if Jewish joy were theft. And yet the community finds its rhythm. Koa carries out platters of food, cheeks flushed from running between kitchen and table. A roasted duck gleams on a wooden tray. Dried figs glisten with syrup. Even a few precious pomegranates have been sliced open, their red seeds like jewels. You see this one, Uncle grins at you. Proof of God's goodness, even in exile. You nod, and yet you sense he's measuring every word. The bride and groom are seated at the center beneath the flickering lanterns, while relatives lean in to tell stories of their own first nights, their own wedding canopies. But always, there's a glance toward the gate, toward the world that does not smile back. Suddenly, a sharp rap at the courtyard door. Everything freezes. You feel your stomach dip like a wave. The music cuts off. Koa drops a serving spoon. Lonnie's hand finds the edge of the table. The Rabbi Old Tua stands, staff in hand. He walks slowly to the door, opens it. 2 Christian guards stand there. You can see the steel glint on their belts. One squints, frowning. "Too much noise," he says. "It's after the hour." Tua bows his head slightly. "Forgive us," he replies. "A marriage. We will lower the voices." The guard lingers. His gaze roams across the courtyard, across your face, across the food. "Keep it inside," he says at last, then turns on his heel. The door closes. Everyone exhales. The fiddler picks up his bow again, but now the music is softer, cautious. You hear the jokes turn quieter, the laughter held back like water behind a dam. Lonnie leans beside you. "We dance for ourselves," she murmurs, "but walk like ghosts in their world." You remember the stories. Weddings interrupted, processions, stoned grooms arrested for public indecency, if they so much as wore a festive robe on the wrong street. And the blood libels those cruel tales that festered in the minds of people who needed someone to blame when the river flooded or the cows fell ill. Some they saying we cast spells. One guest jokes too loudly that if we say blessings together, the moon will fall. He laughs, but the rabbi doesn't smile. The bride looks down at her plate. Still, the celebration continues, more quietly, more inward. The bride leans to whisper something to her new husband, and his face lights up just briefly. No one else hears, but you see it, and it's enough. It's everything. That's the secret, isn't it? That even when joy is rationed, it multiplies in silence. That love doesn't need approval to be real. Later that evening, you join a small group on the rooftop. From here, the town stretches out before you in layers of slate and chimney smoke. A church steeple rises high, casting its shadow even now. And below, the faint sound of a Christian celebration, some saint's day or noble's feast carries on with unrestrained song. Koa sits beside you, swinging his legs. "Do you think they ever worry about our feelings?" he asks. You consider it. Maybe you say, but probably not tonight. He nods. "I don't hate them," he says quietly. "I just want them to leave our weddings alone." Historians still debate whether moments like these Jewish joy in Christian lands were resistance or mere ritual. But here, in the hush of twilight, you understand it isn't about defiance or obedience. It's about endurance. As you descend the stairs, you pass by the bride's grandmother. She's tucking a leftover fig into her sleeve, eyes sparkling. "Weddings are the best kind of mischief," she winks. "We live loudly, even when we whisper." And so the night continues. Not loudly, not safely, but beautifully. You return to the table where the groom lifts his cup in a silent toast, not to the crowd, just to her, to the life they'll try to build between the walls. Before the sun breaks through the rooftops, before the birds begin their gossip in the eaves, you walk down a narrow passage cool with stone and silence. Today, the bride prepares for her immersion, the ritual bath known as the mikveh, and you are allowed to witness from a respectful distance. There is no crowd here, no music, only steam rising through old brick and the sound of water lapping gently in a stone basin. The mikveh lies beneath the women's side of the synagogue, a small chamber lit by a shaft of morning light from above. Water trickles in from a nearby stream purified not by hand, but by the laws of the earth and sky. The room smells faintly of limestone lavender and candle smoke. You feel as if you've entered a hidden sanctuary older than memory. The bride steps forward barefoot. Her robe falls away slowly, respectfully, and two elder women, one her aunt, the other the bath's keeper, inspect her for cuts, braids, and anything that might obstruct the water's touch. Even a strand of hair tied too tightly would dishonor the ritual. Imagine standing in that water. Lonnie whispers from beside you, voice barely a breeze. Cool still, like being born again. Indeed, this is a kind of rebirth. For centuries, Jewish brides have come here before their weddings, not to cleanse sin, but to mark transition from girlhood to womanhood, from one house to another, from a name to a name joined. Historians still argue whether the mikveh ritual in medieval Europe functioned more as spiritual renewal or communal surveillance. But to the women in this room, it is neither burden nor performance. It is breath. The bride steps into the water slowly, as if descending into a memory. The surface ripples around her calves, then her waist. The older woman holds a linen cloth to offer modesty, but the moment is not about shame. It is about contact. Between water and skin, between old and new. She bends her knees, submerges fully. For a heartbeat, she disappears. You hold your breath, and then she surfaces. She wipes her face, speaks the blessing softly. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning immersion. The older woman nods, and a flicker of something like pride moves through the room. Outside, the chamber life is already waking. Vendors set out baskets of onions and salted fish. The local priest passes down the street without glancing into the ghetto, his robes trimmed in crimson, his silence heavy. But inside, the mikveh time is slow, reverent, suspended. You watch the bride exit the bath and wrap herself in fresh linen. Her hair is damp and hanging in waves, her eyes quiet but lit with something steady. Resolve, perhaps? Not the blushing joy of courtly love, but the grounded, rooted stillness of someone preparing to carry centuries. Do you feel different? Lonnie asks her softly. The bride smiles faintly. No, she says. But the silence does. Later that morning, the bride returns home. She will not touch the groom again until the ceremony, not even a fingertip. This separation is not cruel. It is rhythm. Holy distance before holy union. You stroll through the market now, seeing how ordinary the world seems and how extraordinary that this ritual exists quietly beside it. You pass Christian wives buying cloth, monks haggling for wine soldiers, laughing about something you cannot hear. None of them know what has just occurred, or if they do not care. But you know. And tonight, when the chuppah rises, when the groom sees his bride, with hair still scented from the bath and eyes full of stormlight, you will remember that she has crossed a threshold invisible to the world, but carved deeply in her soul. Lonnie walks with you a while, brushing a curled leaf from your shoulder. My mother says if a bride's immersion is heartfelt, her marriage will weather any storm. You nod. And if it's not, she shrugs. Then she prays harder. Koa joins you near the square, where a group of boys are drawing lines in the dust with sticks. They say the water remembers. He muses every woman who's ever stepped in before you. That's a lot of remembering, you say. He nods. And a lot of forgetting, too. You think about that as you walk back toward the quarter's center. How water erases and preserves. How faith asks you to believe that the same bath used by your grandmother still holds something of her in its silence. Historians still debate whether these rituals were taught in secret to protect them from Christian scrutiny or simply practiced as private family tradition. But in the flickering world of 14th century Jewish Europe, privacy itself is both armor and intimacy. That evening, as candles are lit and guests begin to arrive, the bride's immersion remains a quiet secret among the women. No one mentions it. No one needs to. But every time someone compliments her grace or remarks on her calm, the women exchange knowing glances. Even the ketubah on the wall seems to glow brighter for it. You watch as the bride and groom are brought together, again, standing just close enough to feel the air between them tremble. They do not speak. But she lifts her eyes to his, and for a moment he sees her not as his match or his obligation, but as a vessel of something ancient, something cleansed, something sacred. And you feel the pulse of a forgotten truth. That love in this place is not the candle, it is the wick. Silent waiting soaked with meaning. The courtyard grows quiet again, but only for a breath. Soon the murmurs rise into soft music, and everyone knows it is time. You take your place near the edge of the gathering, just close enough to feel the tension in the air. Not fear, this is something else. Anticipation, reverence, a hush before the vow. Under the canopy, the chuppah 4 men still hold the poles upright, their knuckles white with focus. One man shifts slightly, and the cloth above ripples like the sail of a boat about to leave shore. In a way it is. The marriage is a departure into uncertainty, into promise, into covenant. The groom steps forward first. His tunic, simple wool, dyed a deep indigo. His hair combed back and still damp from his earlier blessing. His fingers toy with the ring in his pocket, a circle of gold plain and solid. No stones, no engraving. In this world, simplicity is strength. Then the bride appears. There's no fanfare, no horn, no trumpet. Just a parting of bodies. And there she is. The veil covers her face entirely. She walks slowly, each step measured, flanked by her mother and her aunt, their arms steady against her elbows. You can hear the hush ripple through the crowd like wind across tall grass. The bride approaches, and you see the moment when she and the groom are finally side by side, divided by the veil, united by what's to come. They say nothing yet. Words are not the first bond. Then the rabbi begins. Tua's voice is low and calm. You can barely hear him from the back, but you lean in, as do the others. His staff rests beside him like a sentry. He recites the blessings, 7 of them, each older than the synagogue's stone, each designed to bind 2 souls, not just to each other, but to the past, to creation, to the covenant between their people and their God. The first blessing praises wine, because joy must be tasted. The second speaks of paradise, because love once began in a garden. The final blessing invokes Zion, Jerusalem, and the eternal union of peace. So, you watch the bride's veil flutter as she breathes. You wonder what she's thinking. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. Her fingers tighten around her bouquet of myrtle and rosemary. And then the ring. The groom lifts his hand, his eyes never leaving her covered face. With this ring, he says softly, "You are consecrated to me, according to the law of Moses and Israel." He places the ring on her finger. Not the ring finger, but the index. The pointing finger, the one that signifies clarity, command the reaching out toward another. She does not speak. That silence is part of the ritual. But her stillness, her breath, her open hand, these are her answer. Imagine offering a promise you whisper to yourself and receiving one in return without a single word. Lonnie, watching beside you, wipes a tear from her cheek. "Every woman I know remembers her ring," she says. "Even the ones who lost it in fire and flight. Even in grief." The ring stays. Historians still debate the origins of the ring ritual in Jewish marriages. Some argue it was adapted from Roman customs. Others insist it reaches back to Sinai. But no one questions its weight. A small circle of metal. A vast symbol of permanence. The veil is lifted briefly, only enough for witnesses to confirm identity. No substitutes. No accidents. In some communities, you've heard this step became law after a groom married the wrong sister. It sounds like a tale for comedy, but here, even small details carry centuries of consequence. Then a moment of quiet. The groom steps on a wrapped glass beneath his heel. A pop sharp quick. Everyone shouts together. Mazal tov. Laughter bursts, like wine uncorked. You smile, despite yourself. Even Tua chuckles, his eyes wrinkled with joy. The broken glass is not just a punctuation mark. It is memory. A nod to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. A reminder that even in joy we carry loss, because no joy is ever untouched. Koa whispers beside you, but we dance anyway. The couple walks away from the chuppah hand in hand, their first steps as husband and wife. Their backs straight, their expressions unreadable. You wonder if they feel changed. They do not look back. The guests begin to follow them slowly at first. Lonnie grabs your sleeve. "This way," she says. "Time to feast." But as you turn toward the tables, you glance once more at the canopy. The cloth still trembles in the evening wind. The poles are lowered, the volunteers shaking out their arms, the ritual folded away like a flag. You hear a boy ask his father, "Do they feel different now?" The father replies, "Different, no. But now, they're not two, they're one." Later that night, as the feast begins and laughter fills the air again, the couple sits in their new home alone for the first time. No witnesses, no words. Just candlelight and the scent of bread cooling beside a window. You do not follow them there. That moment belongs to them. But outside, the veil remains on the chair where she left it. The ring remains on her finger. The blessings remain in the air, like music you can't quite stop humming. And you walk away quietly, with the sound of crushed glass underfoot, and the echo of 7 blessings in your mind. It's a rare thing this night, with no shouting, no orders barked from patrols, no rumors of fresh edicts posted on church doors. For once, the Jewish quarter breathes easily. And it breathes sweetly because tonight is a wedding feast. You're seated among neighbors in a narrow alley turned banquet hall, wooden tables dragged together, benches groaning under the weight of laughter and wine. You wipe your hands on a linen napkin and reach for a date stuffed with almonds and honey. The taste explodes in your mouth, sticky, rich, celebratory. It's not just food, it's proof. Proof that joy like bread rises even in the coldest ovens. The bride and groom arrive to cheers. They look different now, not in clothes or posture, but in weight, as though a new gravity surrounds them, invisible but present. She has tucked rosemary behind her ear. He wears a new belt embroidered by his mother. Small things, but symbols run deep here. The music starts with a slow rhythm. A nigun, wordless and winding like smoke. A single fiddle, then a drum. Feet begin tapping under tables, fingers beat rhythms on pewter cups. Lonnie claps once, leans in and says, "Here comes the first joke." And sure enough, Tua, the rabbi, stands and begins a story that turns sideways into a punchline about a goat, a rooster, and an inattentive groom. Everyone roars, even you. But beneath the laughter, you can hear something else: relief. This isn't just a party. It's a pressure valve, a moment to pretend for a few hours that the world outside the ghetto walls doesn't exist. Historians still argue whether Jewish wedding feasts in 14th century Europe were acts of escapism or communal declaration. Either way, here and now, they feel like spell work, joy woven from onions wine memory. Koa passes by, carrying a tray of roasted fish. Careful, he grins. The bones are sharp, but the meat is divine. He disappears again before you can answer, swallowed by the crowd. The groom is pulled into a chair, hoisted by laughing friends. Someone shouts a blessing. Someone else throws dried herbs in the air. The bride watches eyes wide, hand over her heart. And then your favorite part, the mitzvah dance. It begins gently. A woman in the groom's family dances with a handkerchief extended. The bride rises face soft behind her smile and reaches out to take the cloth. They circle each other, never touching. Others join in, men and women, old and young, spinning in slow loops like stars in a ritual galaxy. No one dances alone. You imagine joining. Would your feet know what to do? Just follow someone who looks confident. Lonnie winks. That's how I learned. The meal stretches for hours. Between each course, another song, another joke. Someone lifts a cup and toasts to the mothers who taught the brides to braid bread and raise eyebrows. Another raises a toast to the fathers who built the roofs that never quite keep the rain out. You try the spiced lentil stew, and feel warmth spread through your ribs. Someone passes you wine too sweet, too strong, and you drink anyway. Tonight, your heart is full, and your cup is always just a little too full. But it's not all lightness. The grandfather of the groom, a man with a voice like gravel and eyes like coal, rises near the end. He holds his cup without lifting it. Silence falls. I remember my wedding, he says. A winter like no other. We walked through snow to find a rabbi. The church bells tried to drown our prayers, and yet we said them anyway. He looks at the young couple, nods. This joy you feel, keep it safe. It is not guaranteed. Joy is not a right in this world, but it is a weapon, a quiet, holy one. Then a smile breaks the weathered line of his mouth. Now, someone pass me a fig. Laughter returns. The fiddler picks up the tune again. You lean back, letting the sounds wash over you. Music, chewing stories, layered like blankets. There's something ancient in this feast. It doesn't just feed the body. It feeds the memory of the community. Every bite says we were here. We loved. We danced. Imagine, Lonnie says beside you, what it takes to feast in the shadow of exile. You don't have to imagine. You feel it. You hear it in the shifting of chairs, the way guests glance briefly toward the windows before laughing again. You see it in the way no dish is wasted, no bread left to grow stale. Everything here is precious because it may not return. Even this moment, historians still argue whether these wedding feasts functioned as declarations of resilience or simply as pauses in suffering. But no matter the lens, they endure in memory. Because they mattered. The night deepens. The air grows cooler. Some guests begin to drift away, whispering goodbyes, pulling shawls tighter. The bride and groom share a private glance. You don't know what passes between them, but it softens the noise of the world. You help Lonnie collect leftover bread. Koa offers you a napkin to wrap a slice of cake. Keep it, he says. A memory for your pocket. You fold it carefully. Not just cake. A relic of joy. Then at last, the fire dims and the last song fades into the hush of sleeping houses. The tables are cleared. The bride and groom are gone, but you remain for one last moment in the courtyard. Alone now, you look up. The stars glimmer above the canopy's wooden frame, long since lowered, and you think quietly that this is how people endure. One feast, one dance, one vow, one generation at a time. The sun hasn't yet risen, but already the streets are stirring. You wake to the sound of boots on stone and the distant bark of orders. It's not unusual. But this morning, after the softness of the wedding feast, the world outside feels sharper, colder, as though joy has disturbed something that prefers silence. You walk with Lonnie to the market gate, where a cart is unloading firewood, and already the Christian guard is watching too closely. She tightens her shawl. You lower your eyes. This too is ritual, but not sacred. After every celebration, there comes the reminder: the walls of the ghetto are not just stone and curfew. They are suspicion. They are boundaries that shift, rules that change overnight, and safety that must be earned every day. The young couple you celebrated last night. They now live in a rented room near the tannery. Their joy will be quiet now. Their door will remain shut most days. The ring on her finger is not a shield. The ketubah on the wall cannot stop an accusation. Why is it, Lonnie mutters, that happiness makes them nervous? You don't answer. You don't need to. You both hear the echo of it in every law passed without warning, in every fine levied without cause, in every whisper about the Jewish noise from last night's feast. And then it happens. A boy runs down the alley barefoot, panting. "Patrol!" he shouts. They're checking the quarter. Within minutes, Doors are shutting. Shutters slam. Bread is snatched from windowsills. The air shifts from celebration to defense. You press yourself against a wall, heart pounding. A man in armor strides past, inspecting the narrow street with bored hostility. Behind him, another reads a list. 10 families, he mutters. Too many guests. The number isn't true. It never is. You watch as the guards stop before a house near the synagogue. The same house where the groom's uncle lives. The man steps out calmly. He's holding a broom. "How may I help you, sirs?" "You held a gathering," one guard says. "Did you have permission?" "It was a wedding," the man replies quietly. "Not a festival. A gathering is a gathering." They take his name, his coins, his dignity. Historians still argue whether these patrols were genuine law enforcement or theatrical displays of power. But standing there, you know they are warnings, reminders. You may marry, you may sing, but never forget who owns the silence. That evening, the young bride visits her mother with a basket of dried fruit. She walks fast, her veil drawn tightly, her ring hidden. You follow from a distance. She passes 3 boys jeering in Latin. One throws a pebble. It misses. She doesn't flinch. Imagine walking every street like it might accuse you, you whisper. At her mother's house, the door opens, then closes quickly. Inside, she lets out the breath she's been holding all day. She sets down the basket. Her mother hugs her. No words. And in that moment, you realize something that wasn't clear before. The chuppah didn't end the danger. It marked the beginning of a new kind of courage. The groom is not idle either. You find him mending a torn window shutter, fingers stiff in the cold. He doesn't speak as you approach. But after a while, he says the landlord raised the rent, says we draw too many visitors. You look at the cracked wall, the water-damaged ceiling, the broken chair. Then you see the candle beside their ketubah still burning. Later, Tua walks the streets with his staff tapping lightly. He stops at each door, exchanging blessings. He never says the word pogrom. He doesn't need to. "We build joy like a wall," he says softly to you. And then we pray it holds. Koa joins you at the corner. His ink-stained fingers tremble slightly. "They find my father," he says. "Said our lantern was too bright." You shake your head. "That's the thing about light," he continues. "It scares people who live in the dark. The night ends without further incident, but it leaves a residue, like smoke, like soot in the lungs. Even in the safety of your own room, you find yourself listening harder to the wind outside. Is that just the breeze? Or boots again? Historians still debate how Jewish joy managed to survive in towns where it was treated like a crime. But they agree on one thing it did. It danced. It whispered. It endured. And as you close your eyes, you remember a joke from the wedding feast. One about a rooster who married a goat and invited only sheep. You laughed then. You laugh now, but softer. And somewhere in the ghetto, behind stone and silence, a young couple shares a meal by candlelight. Their joy, like a seed in frozen soil, waits for spring. You wake to hushed voices, different this time. Lower, heavier. Not patrols, not tax collectors, but gossip laced with something older. You step outside and feel the tension, not as fear, but discomfort. This time, it's not from the outside. It's coming from within the ghetto. A whisper spreads like spilled wine, a girl, they say. A Christian boy, seen walking together near the bridge. You know what that means. It doesn't matter if it's true. It doesn't even matter if they spoke. What matters is appearance, propriety, boundary. In this world, a Jewish girl, seen near a Christian boy, is not a coincidence, it's a crisis. You follow the murmurs through the alleyways until they pool in the corner bakery, where 3 women huddle behind the oven. Their hands knead dough, but their voices are sharper than their knives. It was Rachel, wasn't it? From the tailor's house. I told her mother to keep her home in the evenings. Her brother is going to lose his apprenticeship over this. Lonnie is already there. Her jaw is tight, her hands crossed over her chest. She doesn't speak, but you can feel the storm beneath her silence. You step outside into the weak daylight, which feels harsher now, and wonder, how does a marriage survive this? Because for a Jewish girl in 14th century Europe, love outside the walls isn't romance. It's rupture. The stakes are not heartbreak. They are exile. Death even. Historians still argue whether such cases were rare or quietly common. Records are scattered, censored, or buried, but the stories remain. Some passed like warnings, others like prayers never answered. You hear one of them later that night from Tua. There was a girl. Once, he begins slowly sitting beneath the olive tree at the edge of the courtyard. She met a boy near the river. He gave her figs, promised her a life beyond the ghetto, away from rules, from contracts. What happened to her? Koa asks. Tua taps his staff against the dirt. She disappeared. And that's all he says. The Halakha Jewish law is clear. Intermarriage is forbidden, not just discouraged. Forbidden. It's not only about faith or purity, it's survival. If a Jewish girl marries a Christian boy, what happens to her children, to her name, to her people? And yet, feelings do not read scrolls. You find yourself remembering the bride and groom from the recent wedding, the quiet glances, the unspoken comfort between them. It was not passion painted in fire. It was something gentler, deeper, and safer. But for the girl, in the whispers. For Rachel, you pass her house that evening. The shutters are closed. A rabbi stands by the door, speaking in low tones to her father. Inside, a light flickers, perhaps a single candle, perhaps none. No one will say what's true, but punishment doesn't wait for proof. Only suspicion. You remember another tale, told by Lonnie, her cousin Rivka, once accused of smiling too warmly at a Christian tax clerk. Her family moved by winter. Sometimes, Lonnie whispers to you, "A smile costs more than a dowry." You nod, but you wonder what happens when the heart wants something outside the wall, not just in love, but in freedom, in curiosity. What happens when the border between us and them blurs just a little? Historians still debate whether such love stories were acts of rebellion or cries for escape. But in the 14th century, in a town hemmed by suspicion, you know that even the smallest act of crossing can shake the pillars of an entire community. The young married couple, your newlyweds, hear of Rachel too. You see them exchanging glances in the marketplace. The groom lowers his eyes. The bride keeps her face carefully neutral. But that evening, in their small rented room, she asks him softly, "Would you have stayed if I had been born a Christian?" And he doesn't answer, because he doesn't know. Later that week, the ghetto rabbinical court, the Beth Din, gathers. You attend, quietly seated at the back. Rachel does not appear. Her father stands in her place, face gray as the sky. He speaks once, twice. The rabbis confer. There is no sentence, but there is judgment. Her name is whispered less. Her mother's bread sells slower. Her brother's job is given to another boy, and the boy, he was Christian. No laws apply to him. He vanishes into the world outside the wall, untouched. You feel the weight of it, this unevenness, this fragility. You remember the ketubah again, how it promised safety, sanctity, belonging. But it cannot protect what does not remain within reach. That night, you return to your room, silent, and in the courtyard, someone begins to sing a lullaby. Low, sad, in a tongue older than Latin. You pause. You listen. Because even here, even now, when names are erased and doors stay shut, the lullabies do not forget. You wake to bells, church bells not yours. Their clang echoes through the stone streets with a rhythm too triumphant to ignore. A saint's feast day, perhaps. You glance toward the ghetto gate and see a pair of Christian boys dragging a wicker effigy toward the town square, laughing as it topples over and rolls. Another feast, another parade, another reminder. The Jewish quarter, meanwhile, remains quiet. The bakery opens late. The blacksmith sharpens blades behind closed shutters. And at the center of it all, two forms shuffle along the edge of the synagogue, the bride's father and the groom's uncle. Their heads close together, their voices too low for anyone to hear. You follow at a distance. They carry a scroll, not sacred legal. A new decree has arrived. The Christian crown has sent word. Jewish marriages are now required to be registered with local civic authorities. Not for approval, of course, just for record keeping. A formality, they say, but you know what it means. It means exposure for a marriage once held beneath the chuppah before God and community. Now, a new layer of permission is demanded from a magistrate who cannot pronounce the bride's name from a clerk who believes your ritual is little more than folklore. You step into the study where Tua is already seated. His staff leans in the corner. The scroll lies open on the table, the ink still sharp and blue-black. A seal stamped into wax glistens in the morning light. A crown flanked by two lions. Why now, you ask softly. Tua doesn't answer. He just taps the scroll with a crooked finger. Lonnie appears, a frown blooming across her brow. They say it's to prevent illegal unions, to ensure Jewish women aren't tricked. You both know that's not the reason. This is not about protection. It's about observation, about interference, about control. Historians still argue whether these registration laws were sincere attempts at social harmony or veiled systems of surveillance. But you, standing in this dim-lit room beside your people, know exactly how it feels, like a stranger watching your wedding night through a keyhole. The groom arrives, shoulders tense. He scans the document. Do we have a choice? No, says the bride's father. But we have a quill. The community must respond. And so it does. That evening, beneath the beams of the women's gallery, the elders meet. They discuss translations should the names be written in Latin Hebrew. Both who will sign. Will the ketubah be copied for city records? It's not a contract if we can't hold the only copy, Koa mutters from behind the curtain. You lean in, imagine someone else owning your vows. Later, the young couple is summoned. They sit quietly while Tua explains the implications. The bride fidgets with her sleeve. The groom asks if this changes their union. No, the rabbi says. Only the way it's seen. The bride swallows. Seen by whom? The people who wait for us to forget who we are. The next day, you walk with them to the registry office beyond the ghetto. Past bakeries that never serve you. Past windows where Christian wives stare without smiling. Into a stone building where the air smells like old ink and distrust. They sign. The clerk barely looks up. You step outside and feel the sky pressing lower. Not because of rain, but because now their marriage belongs to two worlds. One warm and ancient. One cold and counting. The bride grips her husband's arm tighter than before. The ring on her finger catches the light. And for a moment, you hope that even in a world that insists on intrusion, love can still build walls taller than laws. Later that week, a wedding is held in secret. Not yours. Another couple, younger, more fearful. They hold their chuppah indoors beneath candlelight and behind locked doors. Only 10 guests. No music, no feast, but their voices still tremble with joy. Because joy, when shared, doesn't shrink. Lonnie whispers, it multiplies. That night, Tua gives a short speech in the synagogue after prayers. Let them take their copies, he says. We will keep the original where it always belongs, in memory. And memory is a scroll no king can burn. You feel the truth of it deep in your bones. The weight of remembering. The quiet defiance of celebration in a world that only pretends to tolerate it. Historians still debate whether Jewish marriages under Christian rule were acts of compliance or courage. You know the answer. They were both. The morning breaks gray and soft, as if the sky itself is trying not to wake anyone too quickly. But behind one door, in the Jewish quarter, no one has slept. A woman sits by the window, veil half-pinned, her eyes swollen from weeping. A pot of lentils cools untouched on the table. This is the house of a widow, and this is the hour where life begins again, but not in the way she had hoped. You step inside gently. The air is thick with oil grief and the rustle of paper. The man who should be beside her now lies beyond the wall, wrapped in a prayer shawl beneath the earth. And she sits between worlds, no longer a wife, not yet anything else. But time doesn't wait. Neither does the law. You look to the corner where two men whisper, her father and the groom's brother. A widow cannot remain adrift. The community must decide, will she remarry? If so, who? And what becomes of the debts her husband left behind? A marriage ends, yes, but the contracts do not. Imagine loving someone so fully that even in their death, you're tied to their decisions, their promises, their unpaid butcher's bill. Lonnie sits beside the widow, her hand resting lightly on her arm. You'll be all right, she whispers, but there are things to discuss. And that's what today is about, the Beth. Din the Jewish court meets by midday. You're there again this time, with more eyes watching. The widow is called forth. She wears black, her head lowered. Her hands are empty, but her voice is firm. She asks a question that stops the room. Will I be punished? She says, for surviving him. Tua answers gently. Not punished, daughter, redirected. Historians still argue whether widows in medieval Jewish communities were granted dignity or reduced to burden. But here today, you see both possibilities reflected in every furrowed brow. The groom's debts were many. Unpaid tithes, a sour loan. And the family that once toasted their wedding now argues about silver candlesticks and who will take in the widow's only son. She speaks again. He left me nothing but a name. Can I keep even that? The court deliberates. If she remarries, the name may shift. If she does not, she remains tethered to a house with no roof. You step outside for air. Rain has begun, a slow, uncertain drizzle that dampens cloth and tempers rage. Koa finds you beneath the awning. My uncle says she should marry the brother, that it's tradition. You nod slowly. That's Yibum, levirate marriage. If a man dies childless, the law once commanded his brother to take the widow and raise children in the dead man's name. But he doesn't want to, Koa adds, and neither does she. Inside, they're now debating Halitza, the release ritual. A symbolic act. She will remove the man's shoe. She will spit on the ground. They will both be free. It's strange, you think. Marriage began with gold and blessings. And now it ends with leather and silence. Later, you witness it. In a room lit by one flickering lamp, the brother removes his sandal and kneels. She speaks words older than sorrow. She spits not in anger, but in weariness. The ceremony lasts 5 minutes. When it's over, she leaves the room without looking back. The next day, rumors swirl that she may remarry, but only if her ketubah is revalued. Inflation touches even grief. The scribe recalculates what was once pledged in goats and wine jars into parchment numbers that carry no warmth. A cousin offers to marry her. He's older, stern, but unmarried. She says no. That evening, you sit beside her in her narrow kitchen. She lights a candle for her husband. She breaks bread for herself. She hums the wedding melody once sung at her chuppah, only slower now. Do you still love him? You ask. She smiles without looking up. I love the memory, but I'm tired of wearing it. Historians still debate whether Jewish widows in 14th century Europe were agents of their own lives or relics of their husbands. But here, in this cramped room, lit by one honest flame, she looks more like a survivor than a symbol. Later that week, she opens a small shop. Not with permission, but with persistence. She sells thread salt and dried mint. The Christian magistrate passes by twice. He says nothing. Tua visits her with Lonnie one evening. They bring a pot of stew. No questions, just warmth. As you leave, you notice her ketubah folded neatly in a drawer beside the shoes from Halitza. She kept both, not because they define her, but because they remind her she walked through the storm and remained whole. It's late evening when you hear the knock, 3 quick taps, then silence. You're in the home of a distant cousin of the groom, a man with too many books and too few smiles. He stiffens at the sound, then motions for you to stay back. The door creaks open. A boy steps in, soaked with sweat despite the cool air. They're waiting, he whispers, in the grove. That's all he says. That's all he needs to. Within the hour, you're walking with Lonnie cloaked and cautious past the edges of the ghetto walls. Not for escape, for a wedding. A secret wedding. You follow the trail of broken branches and flattened grass into a grove behind a vineyard just outside the Christian quarter. It smells like crushed thyme and damp stone. There beneath a low tree, a white sheet has been tied between 2 poles. Not a proper chuppah, but a symbol. Enough. The groom stands barefoot, dust on his hem. The bride, cloaked to her chin, glances toward the road every few seconds. Her parents are absent. Only a handful of witnesses have gathered just enough for a quorum. You take your place at the edge of the circle. A candle is lit. A breath is held. Then Tua steps forward from the shadows. He doesn't speak right away. His carved staff presses into the soft dirt. His beard is dew-wet, but his eyes, even in this flickering light, are steady. This is not how we wish to marry our children, he says. But when the world insists on watching, sometimes the holiest moments must be hidden. The couple nods. You learn quickly why the secrecy. The bride is from a nearby village, technically outside the allowed boundaries. Her parents had no permit to reside inside the ghetto. The union would be questioned, fined, perhaps even annulled by a magistrate who claims no proper record exists. But the families knew each other for years. The love, rare and true, was undeniable. Historians still argue whether these clandestine marriages were betrayals of legal process or defenses of dignity. You don't need a historian tonight. You only need to see the bride's trembling hands, the groom's tearful smile. Tua unwraps the ketubah. It is short. No flourishes, just names, dates, a sum in copper coins. 2 signatures, already inked. 1 more is added now. The blessings are whispered. No song is sung. A ring is offered, a veil briefly lifted. You hear only breath and the shuffle of cloth. No one breaks a glass. Too loud. No one shouts Mazal Tov. Too risky. But the bride leans forward and rests her forehead against the groom's. And in that quiet gesture, something ancient clicks into place. Later, after the candles are snuffed and the sheet folded, the small group disperses in silence. No feast, no dance, just quick steps down darkened paths. Lonnie and Koa walk beside you, their faces unreadable. At the edge of the ghetto gate, Koa finally speaks. If a marriage isn't seen, is it still a marriage? Lonnie answers for you all. If the vows were real, it's stronger than any church bell. The next day, you pass the groom now, husband in the tannery. He doesn't acknowledge you. But when he turns to speak to the apprentice, you catch a glimpse of something tucked into his belt, a folded scrap of linen, white still damp with last night's dew. The bride does not appear for days. Word is that she remains inside, that she will slowly be introduced into the community, quietly, carefully. Her name is not listed in any register, but within the walls, women begin to whisper blessings over her as she passes. The bread at her door is shared. A child leaves a pomegranate on her step. This, too, is how a marriage is recognized. You sit with Tua that evening. He carves a new pattern into his staff, 2 loops intertwined, the faintest suggestion of rings. They'll come for the paper, he mutters, but they'll never understand the vow. He looks up. You were there. You nod. He doesn't smile, but he says good. The more who remember, the less they can erase. That night, as you lay down to sleep, you imagine the couple lying in their small borrowed room. No celebration, no feast, no official seal. Just warmth, just breath, just love beneath the eye of a world that refused to see it. Historians still debate how many of these secret marriages were ever discovered. But you understand something deeper. What is hidden is not always lost, and sometimes what blooms in shadow grows strongest of all. The first year of marriage is a quiet sort of storm. No loud thunder, no crashing waves, just the endless motion of 2 people learning how to live within the same breath. You wake in the small home of the bride and groom, still newlyweds, and already you feel it. The creak of new wood, the cautious rhythm of shared footsteps, the careful division of morning tasks. She lights the Shabbat candles with hands that no longer tremble. He hums as he sweeps the doorway, the tune slipping off key more often than not. There's flour in the air and a pot of lentils on the fire, but beneath the scent of cumin and fresh bread is something else effort, because this too is a ritual, not just marriage, but making it work. The ketubah still hangs on the wall, slightly askew, the ink now dulled from smoke and steam. A few guests have stopped by, offering advice, bread unsolicited commentary. She should rise before him. He must never let her draw water alone. Don't forget to share. The oil lamp light divides poorly. You watch it all unfold slowly. There's the moment he forgets to refill the oil in the Sabbath lamp. The moment she oversalts the stew. The moment they both speak at once and fall into silence. And then the laughter that follows. Imagine marrying someone, Koa whispers to you one afternoon, and realizing you never knew how loudly they chewed. It's not just food and chores. It's law. There are customs for everything, from how they speak in public to when they may be alone. The first year is one of gentle allowances. The husband is expected to stay close to build joy and trust. No military service. No long travels. Just presence. Historians still argue whether this period of no interruption was a legal cushion or a spiritual safeguard. But here, in this little room with one cracked window and a clay floor, it feels sacred. You see them move through the week like dancers on a narrow stage. Friday night, she sets the table with the good cloth. He recites Kiddush with one hand resting lightly near hers. On Saturday, they walk together after prayers, her fingers tucked just inside the fold of his sleeve. They don't speak much in public, but in the quiet hours, you hear them. She recites psalms aloud while he mends a sandal. He tells stories while she kneads dough, half-remembered tales of ancestors who outran fires, rebuilt homes, married under the open sky. "Do you ever wonder?" she asks one night if we'd have met without the matchmaker. He nods. "But I wouldn't have known to look." They share a bed, now narrow and hard, and take turns stoking the fire. He counts coins, carefully placing them in a jar behind a loose brick. She marks dates on a scrap of parchment tucked in a jar of barley. Joy is not a burst of music. It is the echo of shared breath across a room lit by one candle. You notice how she hums differently when sweeping, how he folds his prayer shawl more neatly since her arrival. Small things, but they bloom. One morning you visit them and find her crying. A broken bowl lies on the floor. She was grinding herbs for the evening meal. He's nowhere to be seen. Lonnie helps clean the spill. You find the husband hours later at the market pacing between vendors. "She didn't cry," he says when we ate onions for 3 days. But one bowl, he carries back a new one wrapped in cloth carved with vines. Not fine, but thoughtful. He doesn't speak when he gives it to her, just sets it down. She nods, and in that nod, another vow is spoken. Historians still debate whether Jewish homes in the medieval period were patriarchal fortresses or mutual sanctuaries. But here you see a third truth. They were negotiations. Daily, tender, unseen. There is laughter again that night. Koa brings honey cakes. Lonnie recites a riddle. Even Tua visits offering a blessing from the Book of Ruth. "May your house be like that of Boaz," and Ruth, he says, "built not in splendor, but in loyalty." The couple listens, heads bowed. When the rabbi leaves, they don't speak for a long while. You remain a while longer, because this too is the first year of marriage. Not only the joy, but the learning, the humbling, the moments no one records in scrolls, the soft conversation shared across a table when the world is asleep. You wake to shouting, not angry joyful, but urgent, like a festival called out of season. In the courtyard, children dart between robes and skirts, shrieking and laughing. You hurry outside to find a strange mix of awe and confusion painted across every adult face. Smoke rises in the distance, not black and choking, but pale and wide like a cloud borne too close to the ground. "The Christian quarter," someone murmurs. "The bakery," or "the stables." But soon you learn the truth. It wasn't an accident. A mob came in the night, torches in hand. Not for food, not for justice, but for blood. A nearby Jewish village has been attacked. Homes burned. Scrolls torn. 2 elders missing. And a canopy of chuppah found shredded in the dirt. Your heart sinks. This is not new. Not for this world. But it never becomes easier. You follow the procession as Tua walks quickly toward the gate, staff clenched, jaw tight. Koa runs ahead with a basin of water and bandages. Lonnie moves beside a woman carrying a screaming toddler. The mother's arm is wrapped in blood-soaked linen. They are refugees, not travelers, not visitors, survivors. By evening, 3 families have arrived, shaking, soot-covered, exhausted. A 4th is rumored dead. You watch the bride from Section 1 now, nearly a year married, offer her bed to a stranger. Her husband sleeps on the floor without question. The courtyard becomes a shelter. Someone spreads lentils over a cloth. Someone else boils onions in a cracked pot. No one complains, but no one sings. Not tonight. The groom from the ruined village sits alone, staring at a broken ring in his hand. He was married just 2 weeks before. His bride is missing. You kneel beside him. "Her name you ask," Devorah, he whispers. It takes hours before she's found. Not by soldiers, but by a child who saw her in the woods. She's barefoot, her dress torn, but her eyes are dry. She does not speak. She walks straight to the groom, sits beside him, and leans her head on his shoulder. Still no words. but they hold each other. The broken ring clatters to the stone floor. "I'll find another," he says softly. Later, you watch Tua pull the tattered chuppah cloth from a sack. One corner has been burned to cinders. The other still shows faint embroidery vines, stars a pair of doves. "Imagine carrying your wedding canopy through a burning street," Lonnie says quietly, "because it was the only thing that still belonged to you." Historians still argue whether pogroms were responses to politics, economics, superstition. But you standing among smoke and honey cakes turned bitter, know that it was fear. A fear of joy that doesn't ask permission, of unity that cannot be taxed, of weddings that do not kneel before crosses. Koa gathers scraps from the ruined village, a child's sandal, a scroll fragment, a bent spoon. "They tried to burn the covenant," he says, "but they only lit a fire we'll use for cooking." Even in grief, he smiles, but his hands are shaking. The elders call an emergency meeting. Some say they should delay all weddings. Others argue that now is the time for more, to remind the world that they are not afraid. Fear is what they want, Tua says, but weddings are what we need. And so the courtyard becomes holy ground again. They stretch a new chuppah between poles, carved with ash leaves. They light candles in pots of earth. They borrow wine. They sing with cracked voices. Devora and her husband remarry not to overwrite the first ceremony, but to reclaim it. You stand at the edge of the gathering eyes, stinging heart torn between grief and reverence. The blessings are spoken in full voice. The broken glass is shattered again. And this time, when they shout Mazal Tov, it is not just for joy. It is for defiance, for love that remembers the names of the dead and dares to keep speaking. For rings reforged and vows renewed with ash still clinging to sleeves. You walk back to your room hours later, the chants still echoing behind your ribs. And on the table, folded neatly, is a small scrap of burned cloth. A gift, a reminder that sometimes what is torn can become the strongest thread of all. The season turns. You feel it in the weight of the air, in the way shawls cling tighter to shoulders and spices deepen in their scent. The courtyard is quieter now, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The grief of fire does not shout forever. It simmers. It breathes. It reshapes itself into memory. You return to the home of the couple you met so long ago, nearly a year now. The same bride who once trembled beneath her veil now opens the door with flour on her elbows, laughter on her breath, and a sleeping infant bound to her back. The husband waves you in without ceremony. He's fixing a stool leg with twine and muttering about crooked nails. Their room is warmer now, not larger, not grander, but lived in. The walls bear smudges from tiny fingers. The shelf holds both candlesticks and a baby's cup. This is what the vow has become. A life. You sit with them through the evening. A small loaf is shared. The candle burns low. When the infant stirs, the bride, now a mother, sings a lullaby. The melody is familiar. You heard it once beneath a chuppah when joy was just beginning. Now it has grown heavier, more honest, more full. Outside, the ghetto stirs with a different kind of energy. It's no longer wedding season. It's rebuilding season. The shop signs scorched in the raid are repainted. The mikveh's roof has been patched. Children chase each other with soot-streaked knees and pomegranates stolen from their mothers' tables. Tua walks slower now, but his voice remains strong. He teaches from the synagogue steps, not just Torah, but remembrance. Do not forget, he says, that every wedding was once illegal, every ring a rebellion, every kiss a reclamation. Historians still argue whether the Jews of 14th century Europe endured through faith or adaptability. But watching Lonnie paint vines on the rebuilt chuppah frame, watching Koa teach boys to write their names in Hebrew even when parchment is scarce, you know it was both. A letter arrives from the Christian Council. New rules. Weddings must now be reported before they occur. Names submitted. Dates declared. Witnesses registered. The message is read aloud in the square. Some groan, some curse, some simply nod, already knowing. But the young mother, your bride from nearly 15 sections ago, only smiles. We'll give them the date, she says, but not the meaning. You follow her to a cousin's wedding weeks later. The ceremony is held indoors behind thick drapes away from windows. But the candles are lit, the blessings are whispered, and the glass is broken with a stomp so fierce that even the guards outside flinch. Joy, you realize, has learned to camouflage itself. Koa approaches with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside is a gift, a silver needle, carefully polished. For sewing new canopies, he says, and old ones. You walk the quarter one, last time that night, past doors that still bear scorch marks, past a window where a boy recites prayers in a cracked voice, past the square where brides once circled grooms under the open sky. You remember them all. The girl at the mikveh shivering but unafraid, the secret wedding under the grove, the widow who refused a second cage, the groom who carried a torn chuppah like a banner, and the songs, always the songs. You return to the couple's home once more. The child is asleep. The fire has dimmed. They sit beside each other, speaking little, their fingers entwined, not from passion, not from ritual, just because. You ask, was it worth it? They do not answer in words, but their silence is loud with love, and you understand. This is what marriage means here. Not security, not certainty, but choosing each other again every morning, even when no one sees. Even when the world requires paperwork. Even when the roof leaks, and the law frowns, and the silence is thicker than the prayers. The husband rises, places the ketubah back in its drawer beside the silver needle, not to hide it, but to honor it. You say your goodbyes softly. The child stirs, once then sighs and sleeps deeper. Outside, the wind carries no bells, only breath, only the sound of two hearts continuing. You sit once more, in the heart of the Jewish quarter, long after the weddings have ended, after the laughter has faded into lullaby, after even the arguments over dowries and broken bowls have softened into memory. The candlelight flickers low. The streets are empty, swept clean for Sabbath, and you quiet and still begin to remember. You remember Koa's ink-stained hands always trembling slightly as he held parchment, like it was something alive. You remember Lonnie's steady breath as she folded bread and whispers into every corner of the room. And Tua, with his carved staff and stories that never quite ended, always leaving space for you to imagine the rest. You remember the first bride, her veil trembling like a sail in wind, and the groom who spoke softly as if his words might be carried off by Christian ears. You remember the ketubah, pressed like a sacred map between their hands, and the soft murmurs of 7 blessings, each one thick with hope. And you remember what came after, the widow who wore her silence like a cloak and demanded no pity. The secret wedding in the grove where vows were whispered beneath a borrowed sky. The shattered chuppah torn by flames and carried like a flag of grief through smoky streets. You remember the joy, yes joy, that dared to return, that danced again in courtyards still haunted by ash. Through it all, one thing persisted: the vow. Not just the words spoken beneath the chuppah, not just the ring slipped onto a finger, not just the parchment inked in Aramaic, but the deeper vow, the one between a people and their memory, the one that said we were here. We loved, we lost, we rebuilt. Historians still argue whether Jewish marriage in Christian Europe was a form of resistance or resignation or resilience. But to you, after this journey, the answer is clear. It was all of them. It was the quiet courage of building a home in a world that did not welcome it, of lighting candles behind shutters, of raising children who could laugh while learning laws designed to bind them, of saying I do not just to one another, but to identity, to history, to survival. You picture Koa, now teaching a child how to write their name, the same name his ancestors signed on a ketubah 5 generations before. You see Lonnie braiding chala for a bride who has lost her veil but kept her voice. You hear so. You hear Tua's voice in the wind murmuring, a chuppah is not just a canopy. It's the sky we carry with us. You exhale, and slowly, gently, the images fade. But something remains, a ring, plain and gold, resting on a folded cloth. A wedding blessing still echoing beneath cracked rafters. A song sung soft and slow, rising from a place that has never forgotten how to hope. Thank you, truly, for joining me through every emotion, every turn, every moment of this journey. It's been an adventure, and I'm grateful to share it with you. As we close this tale, I wish you a peaceful evening. May you have a restful night, deep sleep, and dreams filled with wonder and light. Rest well, you've earned it. And when you're ready for the next story, I'll be here waiting to journey with you again. Before you go, if you love this tale, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what moved you, surprised you, or lingers with you long after the story ends. Until we meet again, good night, and see you in the next adventure.